Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second session as we work towards our final project report. Last week, we would have looked at the structure of the report and we completed chapters 1 and 2, chapter 1 being the introductory chapter and chapter 2 being the background research. Today, we're going to continue work on the project and we continue now with areas you've already done. So we're going to do 2 chapters today. And today, our focus will be on the LSEP issues as well as risk. The good news for many of you all is you all have already completed the LSEP issues and you've already completed the risk as well. So all you need to do is just to improve and enhance what you would have done before, right? So the lectures covered here are the same lectures you would have used in the project planning module when we looked at legal, social, ethical, professional issues. So we're using the same lectures again because the same information we'll be covering, okay? So let's get started. Our word for today is about keeping on or keep believing, right? I guess if you're familiar with that Journey song, Don't Stop Believing. So it's pretty much the same as well. Sometimes in life, a fog sets in. You don't know which way is the right direction, and every voice may tell you that it's not going to happen. But God has placed a promise in your heart. Refuse to listen to those voices. You keep believing. There are so many times there are things that you really want to do and want to achieve, and there are many naysayers as well. You know, if you have a goal and a dream, you continue to pursue that dream, you know, and keep believing in it and work hard. Don't just believe, but you also have to work hard at it as well. One of them might be to complete your degree as well, right? And we're very near the end also. So you keep believing, you continue to work hard, and you will see the promises come to pass. What we're going to do is just again a recap of the structure of the report so that you understand exactly where we are in relation to where we need to be. So every week, as I said, we'll be doing 2 chapters at a time. We'll finish ahead of schedule, right? But I will. I hope you guys get to finish too as well, right? So this is the general structure of your final report. There's a title page, an abstract, a table of contents as well. You have acknowledgement, table of contents. Then you have your chapters. Chapter 1, which is introduction. Chapter 2, which is your background research. Chapter 3 is the legal, social, ethical, and professional issues. Chapter 4 being your risk. Chapter 5 is the requirements analysis. Chapter 6, the design. Then the implementation, testing, and evaluation and conclusion. Of course, you have your bibliography and appendices as well, or your references and appendices. So today's work will be on chapters 3 and 4. All right, so that's what we're going to look at. Now, just to verify, I believe every one of you here would have done LSEP as part of your project planning module, right? And once you've done the project planning module, LSEP would have covered initially in the project proposal, which is the project critique, which is your first assignment, as well as your second assignment as well. So we're going to utilize that and we're going to include it again in this report. Well, at the end of today's class, we are going to update that file which we started working on last week. So last week, we started doing some work on your FPR document, and today we're just continuing work on it, and we're going to keep adding things that you would have already done so that, you know, you'll see progress as you go through. All right, so moving on. Our chapter today is on legal, social, ethical, and professional issues. All right. Our structure of this report. So this chapter would have an introduction, and every chapter will have an introduction. Then you get into the legal, social, ethical, and professional issues, right? So we're doing them one at a time. In terms of the legal issues and just the introduction, you should introduce the chapter by writing a brief introduction on why LSEP is important, right? And also close off by discussing, right? So close off by saying that this chapter will discuss the LSEP issues. Good. So basically 2 things. Why is this chapter important? Why is LSEP an important issue? And then what will be covered in the chapter. So for the first part, you could just do a Google search on the importance of LSEP in terms of information technology. And the second part is what is covered in this chapter. All you have to do is go back to your structure of the chapter, and what is covered here will be the legal, social, ethical, and professional issues. An example would be information technology and information systems impact our lives in many ways. In our everyday lives, we use technology at work as well as in our personal lives. We use information technology to communicate, to shop, and to conduct financial transactions. With a growing number of individuals and organizations storing personal, private, and confidential information online, there have been numerous cases regarding hacking and the need for data protection, to name a few. Although in many countries, the IT industry is currently unregulated, professional bodies such as the British Computer Society has formulated standards for the computing profession with a view to address legal, social, ethical, and professional issues in computer science. This chapter focuses on the legal, social, ethical, and professional issues affecting this project. Good. And that's an example of the introduction. The first part here, in fact, or most of it, tells you about the importance of LSEP in relation to computing. And then the last part tells you what will be covered in this chapter. Good. So now that you have that, let's look at legal issues, right? Now, what we can do, the first part of each just is an overview of what legal issues, about legal issues in turn, right? So as an IT professional, you will be expected to demonstrate a good balance of technical knowledge, and you must be aware of legal, social, ethical, and professional issues, right? So there are a number of legislation as well that impact these. So for example, there's the GDPR. The GDPR is used across Europe, and Data Protection Act 2018 is the UK's equivalent. Now remember, before they operated as one, and one act would have supported both. But because of the whole Brexit issue, UK have their own Data Protection Act, which is Data Protection Act 2018, while Europe uses GDPR, right? So those are some of the different legislation. There's also the Computer Misuse Act, Equality Act, copyright and intellectual properties rights, etc. So those are some of the different laws that relate to it. Now, what I've done here is basically try to give you some things to consider when writing. Now, there are many legal issues to consider when you're developing these projects. Some of these things may include like using trademark logos, etc. So for example, if you're using anyone's logo, anyone's trademark on your website, you need to acknowledge some of these, right? So determine whether it's permissible to use these, right? So if you haven't used it, no problem. What I mean by that, some of you may have social shares, like you may have a Facebook image, Twitter image, and those sort of things. If you're using any of those people's copyrighted images, then you may need to get permission in order to use it, right? So those are one, right? And then other things you need to consider is the rights and freedom of the subjects regarding accessing and processing of their personal data. Would you be storing anyone? So let's focus on this here. Would you be storing anyone's personal data? Ideally, would your project be required to store people's personal data? I need you to work with me here in answering, because we're going to show you how to apply some of these. Would you need to store any personal data for any person at all in your system?
Not on mine. What I would do is create test accounts.
Right.
And those user accounts would be stored.
But the fact is that the system is being created for persons to enter their data, right?
Yeah.
Right. And therefore, although your system is not going to go live, the fact is that it is going to be created for people to use it, right?
Right.
And therefore, because they're going to use it, they're going to add their data to it. And therefore, you need to therefore ensure that compliance, you develop the system to comply with the data that is being stored. So for example, if I'm a developer and I'm developing a web application for CTS to store students' data, I need to develop it. So even though that's CTS responsibility, but the fact is when I develop the system, I have to develop it with legal issues in mind. And the same thing you have to do here, even as a student, right? You are developing a system, and what happens after, although you're not implementing it live, but you also have to develop it with the understanding that it will be used by people, and therefore you have to cater for certain things. So therefore, for example, if the data that you're going to be storing for people, it needs to be protected. The other thing is, one of the rules is that if you're storing data about me, I need to know what data you're storing about me, right? Therefore, the users should be able to access their data to know exactly what information you're storing about them. And the user should also be able to update their information as well. Now, right, so those are some of the things, but of course there are restrictions in terms of what they can and cannot change. For example, I cannot go to log into the bank and change my account, the amount in my account, right? I could only do that by depositing or withdrawing monies, etc. Right? So, but the fact is that I should be able to review my personal information that you have stored, and there should be ways that users would be able to update the information too. So the rights and freedom, so when you're building a system, a legal issues, you have to consider the right and freedom of the users, right? The data subjects regarding accessing and processing of their personal data, as well as the obligation of data users and processes controllers. So the thing is that according to legal issue, right, personal data should be accurate, it should be relevant, and should be sufficient for its purpose. What we mean by sufficient for its purpose, there are some websites that collect a lot of information, and some of these may not be relevant. What they're saying is only collect data that is relevant, as opposed to just nice to have data. If there's no absolute need for it, then you shouldn't be requesting people to enter data that you're not going to use, right? So that's part of it there. And also it should not be kept longer than necessary. Also, a practical consideration around personal and sensitive data is appropriate security measures to keep data secure. Let's focus on this here now. Coming out of this, what legal issues can we discuss with your application? What we're discussing here now is the fact that, one, when you are collecting information on the user, right? So for example, when a user is registering, that's one point where you collect data about the user. Can you tell me any other places where you could collect information about the user in your system? So registration is one of them. And any other places where you could also request information about personal data on a user in your system? Update profile. In update profile, that's where persons can enter information as well about themselves. So the update profile, as well as when they register. So when a person is registering, you may want just to collect minimal information at registration, because you want them to register as quickly as possible. So you normally, during registration, you wouldn't have all the fields in the users table. You just have the crucial ones. But in updating their profile, this is where now they could add a lot more information as well, even preferences and other things as well. So that's when they update their profile. Now, what they're saying here is that in terms of this here, the information that you're collecting should be relevant and sufficient for its purpose. So in your application, are you collecting any irrelevant information or information that is not required, but you're still collecting it? Or would you say that you are only collecting relevant information that is pertinent to the use of your system? What are your thoughts on that?
The information I'll be collecting is only relevant to using the system and nothing that would be of personal use, meaning that I don't need any credit card number or address per se, just location and email address, stuff to log in, and then to create your profile, which would be a phone number only available to the particular user that is signing in, so as to use the multi-factor authentication method where a code would be sent to their phone when they are logging into the system to ensure that it is they who are logging in.
Excellent, Chester. So based on that, now the thing is, you could collect more information as well, but the reality is that whatever you collect should be relevant to use. For example, in order to do, for example, like if you're going to do recommender systems, you may want to collect information about their preferences, right? And ask them to you know, so if you're collecting that information, the fact is you're collecting it because you're going to use it to assist in your analytics part of it, right? Or your recommender system, or however you're going to use it, but it is going to be used for something. So in your case, you are saying you're only collecting information that is relevant, that is necessary, and no additional data is collected that will not be used. Now, should you talk about that when you're writing up the legal issues? Should those be things that you should actually mention how you are conforming to legal issues under data protection? Or does it mean that because you're conforming, you have nothing to say? What are your thoughts? And this is to open to everyone. What are your thoughts on this area? Should you write about it because you know you're conforming? Do you bother to write about it and say that you are conforming and that you're only collecting information that is relevant and necessary? Or do you leave it out because you are complying?
I think it should be mentioned maybe as an example, you know, just to show what it is you're really collecting.
All right. And the answer is yes, you need to talk about it. You see, because the whole idea of this chapter is to show how you are complying, right? and to show that you are complying. So a couple of things. One, it shows that you are aware of the legal issue, and the legal issue here being that where personal data is going to be stored, it is relevant and sufficient for purpose, meaning no additional data is stored that is not going to be used. And how you do that is that data is collected only, and therefore you could mention that you're only collecting data that is required, such as, and you give examples of it, right? If you wish. And so what you do, you're doing there is you are showing understanding of legal issues, and you're showing compliance of legal issues by showing how you've applied it to your project, which is crucial. Okay, so therefore the answer is a resounding yes. You need to, because you need to show compliance. Many of you will read these and not figure out anything because you're just reading it without really reading deep enough to understand and apply what this is saying, right? It also says that a practical consideration around personal and sensitive data is appropriate security measures to keep data secure. What can you talk about appropriate security measures to keep data secure? So you are collecting personal data. What are the security measures you are using to keep data secure? Guys, I need some discussion, feedback on you guys. What are you doing to keep personal data secure?
As the type of devices and the software that you have on the server, meaning that if you have a firewall implemented, encrypted data capability, antiviruses, that sort of defense mechanism that you put in place so that hackers or anybody outside will not be able to get in to the system.
Well, that's one approach, and there are other simpler approaches as well. So that is at a high level. So encryption is one way of keeping personal data secure, but the problem is you won't encrypt every single thing. You would encrypt, like, for example, passwords, credit card information, if it is going to be stored, etc., right? But like a person's general information, like their name or date of birth, you may, or some of these may or may not be encrypted depending on the level of security you're looking for. But what I was also getting at in terms of this year, in terms of some security measures to keep data secure, would even be simple things as username, password, right? So therefore, in order to access the system, you need a username, password in order to access the system, right? That is what you call an authentication scheme, right? And then, so to authenticate is to check to ensure that you persons have username, password to be able to access the data. And then the other thing is, once you've logged in, you have what you call authorization scheme, meaning that users will only be able to see their data and not other person's information, right? So therefore, a combination of authorization and authentication schemes are relevant in order to ensure that it's appropriate security is employed. Are you guys using username, password for logging in?
Yes.
Are you all also using, like when you log in, if you have 5 users, can each user see the other person's personal information or not?
No, each user can only view their own profile.
Right. And therefore, that is an example of authorization and authentication schemes. And therefore, what I'm getting at is all of those are things you're going to talk about here to show compliance with legal issues. You understand how I'm showing the legal issue and to show how you're complying with it, right? And that is what your chapter is going to include. That's the kind of things you need to write about, okay? Next, ethics and data protection. Now, there's a big overlapping between ethical issues and data protection as well, right? But we will get more in terms of like ethical issues later on with regard to using humans in the program, right? Okay, copyright, determine content ownership. It's safest to use all original content when building a site. So what it's saying here is when you're building a site, try to use original content rather than use other people's stuff. So in building your course information, did you copy and paste other people's information to build your course, or did you use your own information? Or you're not building content, you're only building the functionality, like the opportunity, the option to create a course. But the course content, that is not your responsibility. That's the end user responsibility to include content. Just to get your feedback on it.
Functionality for now, the content yet to be determined whether I'm going to take it off any website or actually create my own.
Right. But in a learning management system, you don't need to create the content. Your content is purely only for testing, right? The
Yeah.
reality is that the courses itself will be eventually created by you're building an app that will allow people, the users, to create courses, etc. So you don't have to worry too much about the course content, because your thing is to ensure that the application has the functionality to allow a teacher to create a course, to add the content, the units and contents and all of those. That is your responsibility. But in doing so, in any of the stuff, you would have used purely original content. So what you want to show is compliance to copyright issue. All the content therefore is original. You are not using other people's information. You are using only original content in building your web application. All right. So that is how you want to demonstrate, compliance with EC as well.
I
As
have a
well.
question.
Go ahead.
So, while it is true that the content would not be created by myself, be created by whoever is entering the data into the LMS, my system is the one hosting it. So, what I'm getting at is like Facebook, perfect example. Well, a good example. Yes, is a social media platform, but the data that can be added to it, modified, etc., could be copyrighted as well. But I think that's one of the things that Facebook is kind of getting some undeserved attention about, because, in other words, it's my application and my server hosted it. If you understand what I'm getting from, so even though it will look like to the general public that that the
I get you, Maurice. I understand, because so although they are the end users and they are inputting data, you are the owner of the application. Therefore, the onus becomes on you. And
exactly, and I'm hosting the application. All the data is hosted by me.
gotcha.
So where does personal responsibility end for the person who is creating the content or uploading the content versus the person who has designed, created, and maintaining the application? Because you'll have updates, you'll have bug fixes, you'll have issues with as if it's browser based, for example, you'll have later versions of browsers, so you'll have to edit code to modify to suit later versions of browsers and stuff like that. Different types of browsers, updates for browsers and stuff like that. So you'll always have some tweaking to do at some point in time along the life cycle of the product in terms of maintenance, etc. So at the end of the day, I am still kind of being held responsible for the content, even though I am not the content creator.
Right.
But
So
I am the person maintaining or hosting the content on the site.
right. So
When the person using the LMS comes to log into the LMS, they're not necessarily seeing the content creator. Yes, you may say created by or updated by whoever, but at the end of the day, they come into my app. Who is the creator of the app? The person, right? So the creator will be kind of held responsible, not kind of, will be held responsible for it.
now this is where, now Maurice, when you build a software and you are selling it, the owners of the software, meaning, sorry, just to clarify. So for example, if I'm using let's say P3, I'm using P3 or Sage or any of those, right? Those software I'm using to put data, to store data. So let's say Microsoft Word. If I'm using Microsoft Word, I didn't create Microsoft Word, but I'm using Microsoft Word. If I plagiarize my assignment, I'm responsible, not Microsoft, right? So the same thing with your application. Now, Facebook is managed by Facebook itself. So therefore, they are the owners of the application. Therefore, they are ultimately responsible for ensuring that there's some kind of measures in place to prevent certain things, right, from happening. So that's why they monitor posts and stuff like that. In terms of the application, when you sell the application, right, or people purchase the use of the application, while you might be hosting, you would have signed contracts with those persons, and part of the contract is to ensure that the content, satisfies certain legal issues and stuff like that. So you would have some measure of compliance from them. So when they purchase the software from you, or they pay a rental to use the software or whatever, your monthly fee or whatever. The fact is, the data, you would have contracts set up so that those persons who are using it, the right is on them, the obligation is on them to ensure that the data is not you are not responsible for the data. Your responsibility is the host. Their responsibility is to ensure the data, etc. Good. So if, for example, I am using Coursera, or let's say I'm using one of those free one of those learning management system that's available. Like, so on University of Hertfordshire, they use Canvas, right? Other schools use Canvas as well, but the university is responsible for ensuring that the content they post is their content as opposed to other people's content that they're using. That's their responsibility, not Canvas responsibility. So in terms of yours, what your responsibility is to ensure that the function is there, but the organization would have maybe someone to ensure those sort of thing doesn't happen. So that's the organization responsibility, not your responsibility, right? But that is separate and apart, because that's part of the contracts. If you are selling the application or renting or leasing, however you do it, right, you would have contracts that will suggest those things. So whoever is helping you to draft the legal contracts, they would factor in those things into it. So that wouldn't be your responsibility. They would become responsible for the data that is inputted, right? So you don't have to worry about that. That wouldn't be covered so much in yours. But if you, for example, if you were building an e-commerce site and you were selling stuff, and all your product, the images and stuff like that, and the description, you are just pulling off Amazon site and using it, then you would be, that will become an issue. So you need to address the issue of copyright to ensure that, so you make a statement on copyright, and your statement could simply be that in terms of the website, the content will all be based by the end user. You are developing functionality, and therefore you have ensured compliance with copyright aspect to ensure that only original content are used when you build the site. That's what you did. When you're building the site, you only use original content. So therefore, that is your compliance from the copyright side. What the end users do when they're using it is beyond your control for mounting, right? So as an example, when you're writing it, my first recommendation is to recognize the legal bodies as well that guide in terms of the discussion on legal issues. So you may have a start-off sentence that talks about the various bodies that would have influenced your understanding of legal issues. So as a future IT professional, one must demonstrate a good balance of technical knowledge and awareness of legal issues that cover the many uses and misuses of the technology, with a view of safeguarding computer users. In considering legal issues related to the project, consideration was given to a number of areas of legislation that relate to computing, including General Data Protection Regulation, Computer Misuse Act, Data Protection Act 2018, and Equality Act, etc. Right? So you identify them. That's your opening sentence, to identify the different bodies that would have influenced your understanding of legal issues in computing. And then now you start looking at how you address these issues in building your application. So for example, in your academic report, you are required to integrate findings from literature into your work, reflect on intellectual property rights that come into play. So for example, what you can talk about is the project involved detailed background research in areas of e-commerce. This research was crucial in informing direction of the project. To avoid any infringement of intellectual property right, you use Harvard referencing, right, for it. What about software code that was not yours? Did you use any software code that was not yours in the program? If you do, then you should comment on it as well, or mention how you address this. Example would be, several features were implemented by reusing code that was available online via tutorials, as well as some blogs. In each instance, these were properly cited and referenced. Another example, discuss software licenses for the software used in the project, right? And all software used for this project were obtained using Microsoft Image Library of software available to students of the University of Hertfordshire. Software that was not obtained from the library was obtained using a 90-day trial version that was valid. What you're basically making it clear is that you did not use any illegal software for this project. All software used were either trial versions or free versions available. Next as well, your application may be required to store personal data of the user, right? Okay, you could use social tags or links without permission, etc. Did you use any of these? Discuss how you address this issue. An example would be the Data Protection Act 2018 is designed to protect the privacy of individuals and prevent the misuse of personal and sensitive data. The project uses an authentication scheme which uses username and password to protect personal data, and it uses encryption to further protect sensitive data such as password, credit card info, etc. Right? So again, you discuss how you implemented security measures within it, and that's a legal issue. Another one that I didn't include here was what we talked about, like only collecting information that was relevant and necessary as opposed to collecting extraneous information that you're not going to use. And also, users have access to, users are aware of the information you store, because when they go to update profile, they can see all their data that you've collected as well, and they have the option to update relevant data as well, right? That could have been included under legal also. Under social issue now, for social issue, this is where in terms of your artifact and how your artifact is making changes to people's lives and decisions and stuff like that. So therefore, based on this as well, okay, so what you're looking at is how your artifact is bringing about change to how things are currently being done. So that's a social side of it as well. So in that regard, right, software quality and all of that is usually part of this as well. So my recommendation here is how to integrate social issues in your proposal. So briefly discuss that social issues, look at the social impact of the software artifact that you're developing. So when you're writing it, this is what I'm suggesting. Discuss the role played by professional bodies such as BCS in establishing a code of conduct and how it helps raise awareness to social issues and their impact. And then discuss social issues relating to your project. Your application may use some form of data mining algorithm or recommender algorithm that uses personal data, and how an individual uses the website, etc. How critical is this software to the business? What steps have you taken to ensure reliability of the system? What steps have you taken to minimize against computer-related crimes? Additionally, you need to consider software development as a process of designing a socio-technical system as opposed to a purely technical process. And you need to be conscious of the impact of software solution in society. For example, right, we are all aware of how Facebook, WhatsApp, etc. have changed the way we communicate, right? Now we are more tech savvy as opposed to before we would depend on calling, etc. Now we do a lot more texting, etc. Right? And therefore you need to factor in how your application changes life. Let's take from a learning management. Traditionally, how do people learn? People learn traditionally by going to class. In a classroom, you learn with everyone in the same class, right? And everyone learn at the same pace, etc. However, your application is going to change things socially. Can you tell me from your perspective, how are some of the changes you expect socially that your application will bring about to people and education? Do you understand, or are you aware of how some of the changes that your application could bring to how students learn and engage in learning material? If you could share with me some of your thoughts, and these would be like from a social side. Come on, guys, feel free to share. You all are part of an online class as well, because this is a change from traditional classroom. Now, learning has moved from a classroom now to online. That's one. Two, now the computer is no longer just a tool you're using to support your learning, but the computer now becomes the crucial tool. And this is how you engage with your lecturer. It becomes how you engage with your material, course material, everything. That's a social change. So we've gone away a bit from the face-to-face and the interaction. And now, as a student or as a lecturer, you have to no longer depend on just facial recognition and try to detect patterns of like using people's facial expression to determine understanding. Now you have to do that with different ways now. So you've lost some things, but you've gained others. In the classroom now, you have some classroom where some with learning and online learning with your learning management system. Now you can access information from anywhere, from home, from your office, in your vehicle, from anywhere. You can be part of a classroom. No longer do you have to drive miles and or hundreds of miles or several miles to get to your class. Now your classroom is right where you are, right? All of these are social changes that have been brought on by your application. Can you share with me?
What about doing the class at on your timing?
Excellent. So this is what I want. So I want you all to add to it. So another thing that you've brought on now is learners can now learn at their own pace without the, so you learn at your own pace without having to feel like you're competing with others now in a classroom. Now you're learning based on your ability, based on your time, your availability, because there's so many other things that's happening, right? So wonderful. Any other changes as well that you can add to this discussion in your social issues? All right. Well,
Would being able to keep on running the same course over and over again until they get it part of social issues?
yes, definitely. So therefore, you can repeat as easily. It's easier now to repeat a course. Also, with the online classes as well and the learning management systems, it has helped to reduce the cost of education. Ideally, one would think online classes should be a little less now as we move to eventually as people move more to online classes and self-paced learning. Because if you look at like Coursera and those are what you call self-paced learning classes, right? As opposed to like the universities, you are not doing self-paced learning with universities, but like websites like Coursera, Iversity, and Allison, etc. You learn at your own pace, right? So there are two different types, right? The one that you learn at your own pace, because there's no physical lecturer present, and you are just using recordings and videos and all of those, right? And text, etc. It's much cheaper now to pursue your studies. Good. And what the other thing it does, it allows education to be more bite-sized. Therefore, you don't have to study an entire degree. You could just study a unit or how much credits you want, etc. Right? And certificates can also be issued from these as well, right? I was looking at changes in the learning trend, and they were talking about like as we move further, right? Eventually, you can just do a course to the size you want. So it's what you call bite-sized course. And each course you do, it gives you credits. And those credits could eventually go towards a degree, right? And therefore, slowly as you learn on your own timing and with your bite-sized learning, eventually adding more and more credits that eventually could lead to a degree. And therefore, unlike where everybody have to do the same set of course to get your degree, now you can choose your courses as you wish. You are not confined by what the university or the theorist wants to complete your degree. Now you can do, is based on how much credits you achieve as opposed to what you achieve the credit in kind of thing. So all of that is the changing face of learning. So all of those are facilitated by your learning management system. So all of those are social changes in the learning landscape. So those are things that you could mention because your learning management system is part of that whole change. Okay, let's take a look at how e-commerce has changed. And if you look at how e-commerce has changed some social issues, then maybe you'll be able to apply it to yours as well, right? The consumer industry has been radically changed with the advent of e-commerce. This has been a huge social transformation as fewer persons are visiting the malls and shops to purchase clothing items. And there has been an increase in growth of online shopping. This application will include social changes, such as using a recommender system to recommend products to the consumer based on their browsing pattern. It will recommend products to consumers based on events or activities they may be interested in attending. This replaces the need to find a store attendant for advice. All of this information is quickly available at your fingertips. Additionally, specials and coupons won't be made easily known to consumers via the website. Would be made easily known to consumers via the website. This replaces the discomfort of using coupons in a brick and mortar store where some shoppers don't use coupons because they are concerned about social status. So now you're doing it with more privacy, etc. So these are examples in terms of how it changes socially. Good. So in other things you can talk about other than, so in terms of the social changes, so let's recap a bit. I want you to help me to recap about some of the social changes that your application could bring, your learning management system could bring. Can you help us to discuss some of the social changes that you may want to include in terms of how your application is bringing about social changes? Just recapping, recapping some of the things we said. Come on, guys, help out a bit.
Okay, face-to-face interactions are no longer required.
Right,
So
so
you have to
face-to-face.
physically be there. So you can physically study at your convenience.
Good. So we have face-to-face, study at your own convenience as well. Very good.
Yeah, okay.
Did I miss out anything you said? Yes, Raya. So we have face-to-face classes have been minimized now, and now you're doing more study at your own pace. So that's good. Okay, let's mark
Also, course.
reduction in cost. Someone else as well. So if people could share in a bit. We're just trying to summarize for the benefit of the class. Can anyone else add on to what we've talked about in terms of how your learning management system is bringing about social change?
Ravi, can another point be being able to access the application on different platforms, operating systems that is, and also on different devices, meaning either iMac, iPad, or Samsung devices or Huawei devices like that?
Excellent. So you can access now learning. Doesn't have to be in a classroom where you have a desk and chair. Learning can be from any device now, right? So it's more device related as opposed to thing. The other thing, what about like anywhere, anytime kind of thing? What's your thoughts on that? Is that something we can include as well?
Yes, the application should be able to be accessible at any time, anywhere, 24/7 from whatever device, whatever browser.
And from anywhere in the world that you are. So now you don't
Yeah.
have to miss a class if you have to travel or the work send you on an assignment or you're on a family holiday, etc. I mean, not that is recommended, but but that might be a downside of the social side because it's available, and you should include that too, because it's available anywhere, anytime. There's no cutoff, and therefore, if you're on a family vacation, there's teaming those things because you still have your assignment due, etc. So those are some of the things. And these are the things that you're building on when you're going to write the social impact of your learning management system. Okay. All right. What we're also going to look at some other things. So as part of your social things when writing, you may also want to discuss like social behavior, like people using weak passwords as well. Often users have a tendency to use weak passwords. So how did you address the weak password issue? You ensure that only strong passwords are required by employing a strong password option, right? Consisting of a mix of uppercase, lowercase numbers, etc. So that's a normal construct, a social construct that you could change. The implication of poorly designed system, right? So another social change is ensuring that you're using proper heuristic like Nielsen heuristics to design your system so that it reduces the risk now in terms of the design, from a design perspective, that the application is made so you could easily recover from error, etc. Right? So these are other compliance of quality control in terms of the application is important, and therefore you want to show that you followed like a particular design heuristic such as Nielsen's heuristic as well for design. Also too, you want to show that you followed a known development methodology like systems development approach to develop the application, so that the whole thing you want to show is that quality in ideally means quality out in terms of your process. So those are some of the things that you would consider under social issues. Under ethical issues, Ghani's main point of concern here under ethical issues is really about if you're using human participants, you need to clearly state that you're following the university's guideline for ethics approval. Now, whether or not you are applying for ethics approval or you're not applying and you don't need it, you still need to show that you understand about ethics approval. Now, when I looked at some of the feedback from the IPR, now, by the way, just as some good news so far, I've only seen 5 scores for the IPR, and I had 2 students so far in the 80s. I had an 87 and an 84, but these are unofficial. So, don't hold me to it as well, because it could be, it could change as well. And I had one in the 40s and one in the 30s or so, right? But when you look at the report, some of the students clearly didn't use a lot of the information from the slides at all. The fact is they would have just provided some of the stuff from before without adding new stuff. I'd encourage you guys as much as possible to follow the general guide with the slide. Two of the best performances so far. Now again, this is only 4 students, so I don't have all, but Janina and Cecil both scored in the 80s so far, right? So well done to you guys. But as I said, that doesn't mean the others didn't. They only had four intermediate results or unofficial results so far. So I haven't gotten more. That's Mina. If Mina is your supervisor, Mina would have provided your feedback. So your marks still to be confirmed. Please don't let her know I said this, right? Okay, but you've done quite well for both of you, and I've reviewed your reports as well, and you've done a great job. There are certainly areas for improvement, right? But when you're writing your legal social issues, just follow general guides from here, and you should be good to go as well. In terms of ethical issues now, there's a lot of overlapping between ethical issues here as well as in the legal side of it, right? So let's go to the section where we actually talk about using the ethical issues. So step 1, briefly discuss why ethical issues are important in IT, right? And briefly discuss what informs your approach to ethical design. So for example, ethical issues can have a devastating impact in the field of computing as it relates to privacy and confidentiality of information, intellectual property, job, and system defects. In developing this project and responding to the myriad of ethical challenges, consideration was given to legislation as well as ethical code outlined by BCS, compliance with GDPR, and as my personal ethics as well. So discuss ethical issues from a privacy and confidentiality standpoint. Okay, so you need to talk about ethics from a privacy confidentiality standpoint. Then, for example, show compliance with GDPR. On May 25th, 2018, the European Union implemented GDPR, while UK implemented Data Protection Act to ensure protection of the natural person in regard to the processing of their data. Following this act, steps were taken to ensure compliance in both the design and implementation of your learning management system. And then you discuss how you will comply. So for example, you will be collecting personal information from shoppers, including credit card. To minimize errors, only relevant and pertinent personal information will be collected. In addition, or if additional information is collected, it will be to inform decision to assist the shopper, such as a recommender system. To ensure that personal information is protected, the system will use authentication scheme, which is username, password, right, as well as authorization scheme to ensure that they could only access their personal data. Encryption will be used to further support the privacy of credit card details as well as passwords. Additionally, users can update their personal data via their user profiles. So you've ensured compliance as well from an ethical standpoint, where users can view their data, they know what data is stored about them, and they can update it where possible as well. Discuss ethical issues from a software defect standpoint, right? Discuss how you would implement reasonable quality control to minimize against software defects. So to minimize against software defect, what you would have done, so you want to discuss what did you do to minimize software defects. So you would have followed a known process called the systems development approach in developing the application as part of improving the quality of the process and to have a better developed product. Apart from this, you would have also done rigorous design, implementation, and testing and evaluation to mitigate against errors such as software defects. So again, for each area of ethics, you are showing examples here of how you would have complied with these to ensure you've avoided any of those issues. Discuss ethical issues from intellectual standpoint regarding the project. Right now, some of these you may have already discussed in legal, so you may not want to repeat it again. So for example, reusing code, etc. In building the application, steps are followed to ensure that there will be no unauthorized use of material, and all material used will be properly cited and referenced. This includes coding. There was some aspect of coding which may already be available that may be reused. These are properly cited. Images and product description will be properly referenced. In the writing of the final report, Google Scholar will be used to ensure authoritative sources are referenced, and all ideas used will be properly cited and referenced. Paraphrasing will be used to minimize the similarity index of the report. Again, all of these don't only apply to the application, but also to your report as well. Okay, all right. The last part, which is the most crucial part, is you have to show that you understand the university's regulation regarding ethics. Don't just say that, well, you're not applying for ethics approval because you're not using human participants and that's it. No, that what I recommend that you do is show that you are aware of the ethics approval process by clearly stating the process. State that you would not be using the process and why, and discuss what alternative you'd be using if you're not going to use other humans in your project. So for example, any studies involving human participants may seek ethics approval from the university's ethics committee. This is required to safeguard the dignity, rights, privacy, and health and safety of participants, researchers, and third parties. This procedure requires applicants to submit the completed application form along with supporting appendices to the supervisor, who will review this and submit it to the ethics committee with delegated authorities. This application may take up a minimum of 10 working days and in some instances up to 6 weeks for review and subsequent approval by the chairman of the ECDA. Given the inherent risk that this may pose at this time to the time-sensitive project, I've opted to forego ethics approval. So I'm clearly showing I understand the process, I've described the process, and I'm saying I'm not going to use it because it takes too long. This means that research will be limited to published secondary sources, and all testing and evaluation will be conducted by the student without the need for other human participants. The initial ethical issues was covered in the EPP, with full details of this in the updated ethical issues as discussed in the appendix, whatever, right? So you've discussed now that you've opted to forego it, and you will be doing all the testing and stuff yourself, right? And you'll be using heuristic evaluation, right, to avoid those. So that's your ethics. In terms of the professional issues now, what you really need to do here is more that show that acting as a professional and you're using your own professional code of conduct as well as the recognized professional code of conduct, you'd have used those in building the application, right? So professional bodies include the BCS code of conduct, right? And the BCS code of practice that would follow. Professionals are expected to recognize that their responsibilities to an organization and to society prevail over their personal interests. So when you're developing this, your responsibility to the organization and to society at large takes precedence over your personal interest in developing the application. Therefore, you need to exercise professional judgment and diligence when developing your application. Okay, so some of the things you talk about will be taking personal responsibility. It's the responsibility of professional to be cognizant of the use and possible misuse of technology developed by them and to take responsibility for their own action, encouraging colleagues and co-workers to do the same. Apart from that, you also have to show personal responsibility by adhering to stringent design and documentation standards to avert potential software defect, ensuring that the final product is as reliable and error-free as possible. Okay, so in writing it now, these are what you may discuss. Briefly discuss the professional body that governs professional issues. Example, practice in IT in the UK is governed by BCS, a professional body which sets out expectations of professionalism by outlining accepted standards of conduct and of practice in the Code of Conduct and the Code of Practice, respectively, to actively promote ethical judgment and behavior. So we've satisfied the first one. We discussed the professional body, clearly indicate how you promoted professionalism in your report. Professionalism, well, in your case, you should do past tense, was promoted in this project by conforming to the standards enforced by a professional body, applying cautious use of personal judgment and approaching ethical decision, seeking suitable expert advice when in doubt. Right? As a professional, you're expected to carry out your responsibilities with due care and diligence in accordance with the requirements of the relevant authority. How did you do this? Professionalism in this project encompasses adherence to stringent design standards, such as using Nielsen heuristics, quality assurance in the design, testing, and implementation to avoid potential software defects, right? And these were done to ensure the final product is as reliable and error-free as possible, right? Additionally, you may want to consider using a privacy policy as well. So a privacy policy will be displayed so that users who are providing personal information on the website will be made aware of how the data will be used. For example, this is the University of Hertfordshire privacy policy, right? What happens is that when a person is signing up, sometimes they have to agree to the terms and condition. You may have, when they're signing up, where they enter their to register, you may have to agree with the privacy policy. So you have to just tick the box to show that you're in agreement with the privacy policy. It could be a very simple sentence or paragraph, as this is, that you could paraphrase for your privacy policy. So you are encouraged to include a privacy policy and part of your professional issues for persons who are signing up. And what your privacy policy is simply saying to you is that, look, I'm collecting information, but I will be using it. However, I'll be using it occasionally to take part maybe in a survey. And if you want, you could unsubscribe from these at any time that you wish, right? So that's part of it. Additionally, messages to ensure that shoppers, if you have younger persons using your site, you should have messages to ensure that only persons over a certain age could use credit card, etc. And this system will also look at instances of addiction. If you're developing an e-commerce site, you might want to be careful for e-commerce, like shopaholics, etc. So you may look at frequency of online shopping and provide advice and measures to assist. Let's change this now from shopaholic to your project. You're dealing with learners, right? How could you apply this now to learners, right? Is there any way so this talks about shopaholic and addiction to shopping, etc., and that you'd be using looking at their shopping pattern as well to take measures to advise and take measures to assist shoppers to prevent them from becoming shopaholics. What about learners now? On the other hand, you may not have like persons addicted to learning, but you may have persons who might be more at risk of failing and stuff because of low level of engagement and interaction, right? You can simply also include a paragraph here to discuss part of the system as well as to recognize users who might be at risk of failing, all right? Persons particularly with low engagement who are not using the system frequently, etc. And therefore, based on that, you could recognize who are at risk of failing based on results in tests or based on engagement level, and you could probably then come up with an option for them to assist them in completing their course of study, right? So those are like dropouts, etc. And that brings us to the end of LSEP, which is the first part of tonight's class. What I'd like us to do at the end of the two, what we're going to do, we're going to take your LSEP issue from your project planning module, and we're going to copy, and that's going to be your chapter 3, and you'll paste it there. Good. We'll do that afterwards. And now we go on to the second half of the class, which is, so the second half of the class is on risk. But you know what? Here's what we'll do. To break from the monotony of the teaching and the slides and the reading, we're going to use now, so you are going now to continue work on your FPR. Do you remember where you stored your FPR that we did last week? I hope you have touched that file since our class last week, hopefully, right? So here's what I'd like for you to do now. So we're going to move from this now, and you're going to find that file, and that's your FPR file that you started last week. And what I want you to do now, I want you to add a third chapter now. So you're adding chapter 3, which is your LSEP issue. And that LSEP issue should be from your project planning module. So when you did the project planning module, you would have had a section called LSEP. If you can include that there. So if you can find that chapter that you did. So what I'd like for you now, if you could pull up your file. So while I'm doing this, I'm pausing sharing my screen, so you can go now and find your FPR, the final report that we started last week. If you could find that for me in the meantime. Okay, guys, so just continuing from where we were last day. So you have your cover page, and I'm happy to see that some of you have continued working on it. And I see some of you, I noticed a couple of you have also submitted to your supervisor your chapters 1 and 2 already, which is good news. So we have your chapter 1 and we have your chapter 2, right? So we're going to the end of chapter 2 now. You're going to the end, and if you'd like, when you get to the end, let me just put this back. You could use Control Enter, go to a new page. Hold on, Control, press Enter, you go to a new page. And this now is chapter 3. So this is chapter 3. And chapter 3 is, well, let me just make sure I have to make sure it's properly named, right? So chapter 1, introduction. This should be chapter 2. Chapter 2. So now it's chapter 3. Legal, social, professional, ethical issues. And then you'll have 3.1, which is the introduction. So you have the file as well. So just to recall as well, just some things as well. So what you would have had is let me just get back to where we were. So IT project. So on the shared drive, under FPR, there's this Word document, the structure of the report. So if you want, you could just simply copy the structure of the report for this chapter. Paste it here. So I have 3.1 introduction. I'm just putting some spaces after each one. Good. And what you've done, so make sure you've done that. I'll pause. So you have what you've done, just a note. In the FPR, in the shared drive, there's the FPR folder. There's shared drive, the IT project shared drive. There's CTS lecture notes. And inside of CTS lecture notes, there's FPR. Inside of FPR, there's a file, a Word document called the structure of the final report. So you're opening that. Please forgive me because we did this last week, but I'm taking for granted that you remember, so I'm sorry about that. So if you could open that structure of final report. And when you open it, you will see this here. So what we're going to do now, we're copying chapter 3 and we're pasting it. Don't close it though, because we have to go back for chapter 4. We paste it here in your document, in your FPR document. After you've pasted it here, you put spaces after each 3.1, 3.2, etc. You put some spaces. So you go to the beginning of the line and press enter to send it down a bit. So there's spacing in between. And inside of those, you'll paste your stuff from your project proposal. Next, highlight the heading. This is heading 1. So you highlight the heading here. Sorry about that. Let me just move this. Right, so, sorry, highlight this. This is heading 1. Good, I bold it. Now this is heading 2, so highlight this. This is heading 2. All right, then each one highlight. Don't highlight everything. You just highlight one at a time, sorry. One at a time, and each of these is heading 2. So you highlight each of these, they are heading 2. Highlight each of these, they are heading 2. Good. All right, so wonderful. I'll just wait to make sure you have this. You can let me know once you have it as well, so that then after we'll move on.
I'm done.
Good. The others, you could put up your hand or something to indicate that you're done. So I'm waiting on you guys, right?
Done.
Cool. Good. All right. Next, what I want you to do for those who've completed now, could you go now to your project proposal? In the project planning module, you would have had a project proposal, right? Could you pull up your project proposal? And now, Cecil, if it's all right, I'm just using yours as an example because you had got one of the highest mark when you did project planning in your semester. So I have yours there, right? Janina and LaQuinta and Soraya, Shania, all of you had really good marks in yours. So Sheldon, your group, everybody had a really good mark for their FPR. So you guys, sorry, for your proposal. So each of you could use yours as well. But in your proposal, you had a section called legal, social, ethical issues. What I want you to do is go to that report. And in that report now, you're getting to your legal, social, professional issues. And what you're doing there now is simply you're copying each. So like this is legal, I'm copying this and I'm pasting it under legal as well. So I'm basically copying from here and pasting it into your report. Good. So you're copying from here and paste it under legal, etc. The only thing you need to do is add an introduction. So the only thing different you need to do is add an introduction. So this is legal. I paste it under here. And for each of the following, you paste it under the relevant section. Good. So can you arrange to do that for me, please?
Well, Ravi, I already did this.
Excellent.
Before, yeah.
Yes. By the way, it's good having Sheldon back. Sheldon was out for a little bit, but I'm so glad to have Sheldon back in our classroom. There's a big difference when you're not around Sheldon. You know, Cecil had to do all the talking. Poor Cecil.
Yeah, Sheldon, we miss you.
Yeah, you only pause right. Thanks. So Ravi, just to add to that note, so in each section, there's a introduction for each section.
Every chapter has an introduction.
Okay.
Not every, yeah, so only the chapter.
Every chapter, sorry, every chapter.
Yes, every chapter has an introduction.
Okay.
And what you do for the introduction, you could just simply go to the slides and look at what should be included in the introduction. Normally, every introduction has two things: why this topic is important and what will be covered in the topic. Those are the two main things. So why is LSEP important and what is covered in this chapter, right? So those are the two things normally you will answer in this here. Now, by the way, just a note as well, I would encourage you, even at the end as well, you have a references section. So at the end, you'll have a references section. My recommendation for you for your references section, copy all your references from each of your reports you did in project planning. Copy all of your references and use them back here, right? Those are your references as well because you would have utilized them somewhere, or for your literature review and for your project proposal. Take your reference section from there and paste it in here, remove any duplicates, and you're good to go. You already have your list of references done. And only if you add on new ones, you just add them back. Don't start building back your reference from scratch. Take everything you have from your project planning. So at the end now, you create a next section called references. You give this a heading 1. So references is heading 1. And you paste all your references from your project proposal as well as from the literature review. You take those and you paste it in. Now, a couple of you, that the couple might just be Crystal, I believe, so far, who's in class here. Chris, when you did project planning module, you had a proposal, but your literature review was included in the proposal, right? So if you want, you could just use your proposal. Only you did not have a separate assignment called literature review. Only the last two groups would have had those where there's a separate assignment for the literature review, right?
Well, my proposal was on the e-commerce side anyway, so
Yes. All right.
yeah, I'm working from scratch.
No problem. All right. So have you guys completed your professional issues now? Your LSEP issues there? Once you have, good.
So just confirming the LSEP, I'm just looking back from assignments I misplaced it. So because I shift around some stuff on my computer, I had to do some stuff over.
Project proposal.
Right, that's the second one, not the literature
Second
review.
assignment. Yeah, that's the second assignment.
All right.
And what you could do, if there's anything, you could also check on StudyNet. If you're not finding it, you could check on StudyNet to see if you submitted, or if worst case, like an email to Gani as well, where you may have emailed it to him, etc. as other options also to consider, right?
Right, I'll find it. Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot.
No problem. After you've pasted it, guys, let's go up now to the top. Go back to the top of your report where your table of contents is. Go up to the top where your table of contents is now. Right click on your table of contents and click update. Sorry, to the top, my apologies, to the top of your table of contents, you're seeing update table. Click update table, please, right? And update entire table. So where you see update table at the top of your table of contents, click update table and choose update entire table. And there you see now your legal chapter 3 is there and your references. Aren't you feeling real good already? Right? So you're making major headway. You don't feel like you're starting from scratch and you're now trying to start off, right? This is a big win for, personally.
Ravi, you won't believe Sunday, I spent the whole Sunday and I did all of this, already putting all the information. I kind of stuck where I need to actually work on the artifact to be able to add more stuff to it. So that's the stage I reach.
No problem. Actually, you'll find mainly from next week's class is where we're going to start more new stuff. Chapters, the first 4 chapters are largely rehash of what we have done already, right? But from chapter 1 to 4 is a rehash. The bulk of it is chapter 5. However, chapter 5, you will reuse some of the stuff from the IPR, but you will also have new stuff being added on. Chapter 6, you will use stuff from the IPR, but you'll have new stuff added on as well, right? So, but the reality is that it has not gone to waste and it's being used. So therefore, it means that you're making major headway with your write-up. And it makes the whole thing a lot easier now to do. And therefore, you could see the light at the end of the tunnel a lot faster now.
Okay, good.
But that's good work for you as well, Shelter. I've done all of this already. All right. So now that we've done this, make sure you save your file. Please save your file. Strongly, I'm encouraging each of you to email yourself a copy as well. At the end of every class, at the end of every update, you email yourself a copy so that you have it, and also store it online. Store it using like a Google Drive or OneDrive or one of those as well, rather than store it locally only, because if anything happens to your computer, which has been the case, right? Often you're going to lose everything. So please ensure that your files are properly backed up online as well. Okay. All right, good. Let's continue now for the next half of class. And now we move on to risk. So chapter 3 is finished, which is LSCP. So we're moving on now to chapter 4, which is risk. This one is a lot shorter than the previous section. So let's minimize. All right. So we're continuing now with risks. In terms of risk, right, well, our word for today is the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. right? So because change is going to come, often we fight change, and sometimes we need to recognize that, look, instead of spending all that energy fighting the old, right, let's try building our new. So that's from Socrates. So in terms of your report structure now, all right, we've looked at it. I'm not going to spend much time there. So we've completed up to chapter 3. We're on to chapter 4, which is risk. In terms of risk as well, so in this section, we're going to do a risk assessment, right? So this section should include any possible risk to the project, an assessment of potential consequences in the context of the project, plans in place carried out in order to minimize any negative effects, etc. Right? So that's your risk assessment. So the structure of the report is the following. You'll have an introduction, we'll identify the risk, you do an analysis of the risk, then you'll look at how to handle the risk, and then the last part is how you control the risk, right? So just an overview. What will introduction include? Introduction is simply telling you why is this chapter important and what will be covered in this chapter. So you can see what the chapter covers, right? Risk identification is where you identify the risk that will impact your project from completing on time. Risk analysis now is where for each of those risks you've identified, you give each one a score or a rating, the likelihood and the consequence, and you use that to multiply by each other to get the impact of the risk. And that is what this does. Risk handling is where you come up, for every risk, you come up with a handling strategy, whether it is to minimize the risk, right, etc. So we'll discuss those. And the last part is, now that you've identified all the risks and you have strategies, the truth is you need to be able to control risk, meaning that risks are not static. What might be a risk to a project at the start, halfway through, it may not be a risk. Sometimes new risks come up. So you need to constantly monitor your risk. And that's what controlling risk is about. So let's get started. The first one is an introduction. And your introduction should include a statement on the importance of managing risk and state what is covered in the chapter. So two things it should include. One is why is risk important, managing risk important, and what will be covered in the chapter. An example would be, a risk is an event that prevents the project from meeting its objective within the timescale provided. Effective risk management strategies allow one to identify the project's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. By planning for unexpected events, one can be ready to respond if they arise. Successful project managers recognize that risk management is important because achieving a project goal depends on planning, preparation, results, and evaluation that contribute to achieving strategic goals. This chapter focuses on risk management process that was used to identify, analyze, handle, and control risk within this project. Good. So let's start now. So in terms of the risk, right? A risk is any event that could prevent the project from meeting its objective within the timescale provided, right? So as part of your final year project, we are considering risk under 4 stages. One is you need to identify the risk. The second thing is you need to analyze the risk, right? And analyze is working out the impact of each risk. Then you look at handling strategies for each risk and then controlling risk. So that is what we look at. So in terms of risk identification, these are some typical risks that would impact your project. So these are some of them that I've included here. Of course, you could come up with other risks as well. So some might be software being unavailable. So because using software, the license may have expired, etc. Others might be hardware unavailable, right? Some might be, a risk might be underestimating the size of the project, right? So the software artifact end up being larger and more complex than you expected. Some might be size overestimate, where it is less complex than expected, and therefore it wouldn't lead to a first class honors result or score. The technology, right, might be a steep learning curve to learn the different software as well. There might be external factors such as changes in personal circumstances, employment, illness, etc., poor performance, scope creep, where the scope keep changing. So those are some of the risks, right? And you could identify others. So we've done the first step is where you've identified the risk. The next, so how do you write this in your project? You could write, as an example of what you include under risk identification is the possible risks associated with the implementation of the proposed project identified below, and you list them accordingly. The next step now is you're going to analyze the risk. And in analyzing the risk, you're going to get the likelihood of the risk happening, the consequence if the risk did happen, and the impact it would have on your project. So the impact is a mathematical score, which is the likelihood multiplied by the consequence. So how could you get a score for likelihood and a score for consequence? Well, in Christian Dawson, which is the text for the subject, page 82 to 83, they use a matrix to help us. So this is the matrix they have there. They had a risk likelihood and a score for it. So if the likelihood of this risk happening is low, you give it a score of 1. If it's medium, you give it a score of 2. If it's high, you give it a score of 3. So this is your likelihood score. And the consequence score is a scale of 1 to 5. You give it very low is 1, low is 2, medium is 3, high is 4, very high is 5. Now, what does likelihood and what does consequence mean? But so ideally, likelihood is how likely is that risk going to happen, and consequences if the risk did happen, if it did actually happen, what consequence would it have on the project? Would it be a low or very high consequence? And then to work out your impact, you multiply the scores of both. Now, what is the lowest score you can have? The lowest score is if you get a 1 for likelihood and a 1 for consequence. So that will be 1 times 1, which is 1. What will be the highest impact? The highest possible impact is if it is a very high likelihood and a very high consequence. So that's 3 times 5 is 15. So the scores may range from 1 to 15. So based on that now, right, we calculate. And what you should do, your priority will be to focus on the ones with the highest impact values. So when you create your table for each of these risks, you put it in a matrix with the likelihood, consequence, and impact score next to it, and you sort it by the highest impact score, right? So I'll give an example just now. So let's move down like this. So for each one of them, you have a likelihood score, you have a consequence score, and you have the impact, right? And you multiply, and then you have your strategy for handling the risk after. So we'll get to those handling strategies, right? So in terms of risk analysis, what would you include there? So for writing this section, you want to talk about the method that you'll be using, right? So you'll mention the method. You'll have to give Dawson his credits as well, because you're using the method outlined in Dawson text. And you should also include these 2 tables so that they know exactly what you're dealing with as well, right? So based on this, your write-up would include the likelihood of a risk happening and the consequence of it happening aids in identifying the level of its negative impact on a project. The likelihood of each risk occurring was measured on a scale 1 to 3, with 1 being a risk that is unlikely to occur and 3 being a risk that is highly likely to occur. Should a risk occur, the consequences are measured as on a scale 1 to 5, with 1 being very low consequence and 5 being very high. Dawson recommends using the following formula to calculate the impact of the risk. Impact equal likelihood by consequence. The scale used in these 3 categories are seen in tables D, E, and F below, adapted from Turner, cited in Dawson, right? And then you have the 3 tables, good? Next, now there are 3 risk handling now. So each risk now, there are ways to handle it, right? One approach is to avoid the risk. This is to eliminate the risk from happening in the first place. They said prevention is better than cure, and that is what this is. This is about preventing or avoiding the risk from occurring. What could you do to prevent the risk from happening? Then there's risk minimization. This strategy attempts to reduce the impact of the risk when it occurs. And the contingency plan really is the steps to be taken should the risk become a reality, right? So based on these now, let's take a look at the 3 examples of them. For risk avoidance, this strategy eliminates the likelihood of a risk occurring. So consider a project that requires a specialist software. Let's say you need a specialist software. One option of the software is to use a 90-day trial period. After the trial period, the cost of the software, however, is prohibitive. So let's say, for example, you want to use Microsoft Project, but there's only a licensed version. You need a licensed version, but the best you can get is a 90-day trial period. After that, the software would not be available. So to avoid this from happening, what option you have, a risk avoidance strategy, is to use an alternative software, like you decide to do a project plan in Excel, which you already have, and there's no additional cost, all right? So you have avoided the risk. And that's an example of a risk avoidance strategy. A risk minimization strategy attempts to reduce the impact of the risk when it occurs. So for example, in case of you lose your data, right? You lose data because of hard drive crash, etc. Regular online cloud backups are used to ensure that if data loss occurs, it is minimal because you can always revert back to it in case, right? Would be an example of risk minimization. So that's how you impact the risk. Should you lose your data, so should it occur that you lose your data, the risk minimization is that you have online backups available. Contingency plan now specifies steps that should be taken should the risk become a reality. So consider a project where it's intended to run accessibility testing involving human participants, but ethics approval is not granted. So if ethics is not granted, what is your contingency? Then you will do all the tests on your own and you avoid the need of ethics approval. Good? So those are examples there. So what you have to do now for each one of your risks, you need to come up. Now you could use more than one strategy per risk. Most students tend to use one strategy. This is an example of a student here using multiple strategies. Now, the reason I like this particular one from a student, apart from the risk here, and they have given a little description of the impact. So like hardware malfunction. So they describe what will happen. The entire project will be impacted by time constraints, poor product delivery, or even project failure. So the likelihood of hardware malfunction is 2, and they describe it as well as medium, but the consequence is very high, and therefore the impact is high, which is a 10. And they came up with an avoidance, a minimization, and a contingency plan. So notice here for each of these, they came up with multiple strategies where possible. And that is what you are expected to do as well. This is an example of what I would like you to do. It's a better formatted table as well, okay? The last section now is controlling your risk. And controlling your risk is simply to recognize that risks are not static, meaning that what might be a risk at the start may change during the course of the project. And often new risk occurs. And because new risk occurs, it means that you have to constantly review or occasionally review your risk strategy to look for new risk and to remove any risk that no longer, where the consequence or likelihood may have changed and therefore the impact may have changed. How often you do that? Well, you could do it based on milestone. After, you could say every 2 weeks I'll recheck it, or every month, or at the completion of every major milestone or something like that, you will review the risk, okay? So that's basically what controlling risk is. So what we're going to look at is the structure of this chapter. So one, you start by, sorry about that, you start by defining what a risk is and state how it could impact your project. Identify the risk associated with your project. Then you do an analysis. So for each risk, calculate the impact. Then you identify the appropriate strategy for handling the risk. You put these in a table. You sort it by the highest impact first, right, preferably. Then you state your plan to control risk, right? So here you state that risk management is not a static process, but change over time and need to be regularly monitored. And this is an example. So you start by an introduction, what a risk is, etc. And then you get into so you identify a risk, then you have your analysis of the risk, right? And then you do your so this is your risk analysis and impact as well. All of these are other examples from student. This student highlighted the high impact one, so you could do that also, right? And I'm using these so you could see other examples from students and see if you left out anything as well. And then you look at controlling the risk. And in controlling the risk, a full assessment of risk associated with the project was included in the project proposal and again in the interim report. Controlling risk was an aspect of risk assessment strategy which involves identifying specific checkpoints in the project progress and revisiting the critical risk list and adjusting it according to my latest understanding. Based on my latest updates, the following risks have been adjusted. So you talk about which risks have changed and why, and then you give the updated risk assessment table. And that's pretty much it. So now we've completed the risk part. So what do you do next? So we're continuing our exercise. What I want you to do now is you have these, hopefully you wouldn't have closed off these files, right? So I want you to using this file, the structure of the report, you copy chapter 4, which is risk. You copy chapter 4 risk, and you go to your project, your FPR, and you go to the appropriate section after chapter 3. So you go to the end of chapter 3, right? You use Control Enter to go to a new page, and you paste there your references. Sorry, this was done incorrectly. I have to go to the end of chapter 3. My apologies, right? Control Enter, put that on a new page, and I come here. So in my blank page, so at the end of chapter 3, LSEP, I go now to my new page and I paste this here, chapter 4 risk. I properly name this chapter 4 risk. Highlight this. This is now heading 1. And each of these, as I indicated, separate them out a bit more. Separate each and highlight each of these now, and these are heading 2. Each of these are heading 2. So highlight each of these, your 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4. These are heading 2. Good. All right. And now that you have that, right? So that's your, so you have, those are your those are the parts of it. Then you go to your project proposal, right? So you go to a project proposal, and in your project proposal, you would have had a section on risk. So what you should do, yours is a very small section here, Cecil, but so you may have to expand on it a bit. But what I will suggest now, if you had done for your risk section, you should have had a more comprehensive item on risk, and you include those in these relevant areas here. So,
Yeah, go straight down to page 14 and 15 and you would see the table.
oh, wonderful.
Straight down to the bottom of the document.
Got you. So you had it in the appendix. Skills, right? Gantt chart. Yep. So here's your risk table. Wonderful. Good. So you have, and you could paste that there. The only thing is we need to include some write-up now on the different parts, right? On the introduction, the identification. You have your analysis here. And in fact, you have your handling strategies. Sorry. So you have your analysis and handling strategies. So you'll paste that in here, and you just need to include some text under each one of these. Good. All right. So once you've completed that now, that becomes your risk. Now, if you don't have it, so what do you do if you don't have this, right? So here's what I recommend you do. So if you don't have it, simply go to the slides, right? And in the slide, you copy the information from the slide and you paste it into the relevant part. So for example, I've given you an example here, right? So you take these and you paste it into your slides. So I've already covered it. You paste these into your slides, and all you do now, after you paste these into your slides, Control C, you come here, you paste this into introduction, and you put it in red so that you know that you have to make changes after. So once you put it in red, you know that this is mine's, not yours, and therefore when eventually Control C, copy, paste it into your relevant areas, and right, put it in red, and you continue along, and you just remember you have to update it with your stuff.
So, Avi, what's the name of that slide? What slide are you using?
This is chapter 4, risks.
The file itself, the file.
Oh, last week, what we did, Shal, I made everyone start a blank file. And
I'm sorry, my bad. I didn't explain properly. I mean the PowerPoint slides that you're using.
Yes, the PowerPoint slide is chapter 4 risk. If you go to, if you go to the IT project share drive, you're with me so far, the IT project share drive? Shal, you with me?
Hold on, yeah, sorry, my mic was off. Yes.
No problem. You have to go to the share drive.
Yes, I am there.
Go to CTS lecture notes. All my lecture notes is in the lecture notes folder.
Yes.
Go to FPR. And in the FPR, every class is in here. Chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3.
Understood.
So this is what I'm using, right?
Okay, good.
No problem.
Thanks.
All right, so that's where you're taking it from. So even where you don't have it, you just simply borrow it from the slides, paste it in.
Put it in your own words. Yeah.
But you're just pasting it initially and put it in red because you know that this is to be changed, right? And you build. So what you've done is you build your structure, and all you do now is you come and you change. And when you change it, you change the color from red to black because you've changed it now to satisfy, right?
Okay, thank you.
All right, good. And that concludes this section here. That concludes this. What I wanted to do, however, and just a note, guys, right? Mina for those of you whose supervisor is Mina, Mina wants the background research to be written in a slightly different structure, right? So in that case, because how Mina wants it, now I'm not sure how Kufre wants it, but I know Mina would like it in a certain way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to draft a second version of the background research chapter. This background research chapter would follow the following. So let me just, so it would be, let me just get the literature review. So I'm going to just guide you through quickly what the structure would be like. So I'm going to provide you with a second version of the background research. And this is really what Mina wants. So, and what Ghani recommends. So the structure of your background research will be, you'll have an introduction, then you will discuss what your different topics are in your background research. And then for each topic you discuss them, then you have a conclusion, a recommendation. Now, this example just talks about 2 research topics, but you can have much more than 2. So based on what she wants you to have a title or topic of your background research. So she don't want the chapter to be called background research. She wants you to come up with a title, right? And therefore, so the title, so you have a title for your background research. And then from there, so for example, your background research might be increasing user engagement and interaction in LMS, or using learning analytics to enhance the user experience in LMS, etc. So you have your title, and that becomes the name of the chapter rather than background research. So you replace the chapter with the name of this, right? So that's your title. And then what you do now, you would have your introduction, etc. And in your introduction, you'll discuss the title, and you'll discuss briefly the different areas you will be covering in your background in this chapter. So one will be the importance of e-assessment, and one is the assessment strategy techniques. And then after that, now you go into each topic area, right?
So, is it just as how we did our lit review then?
Yes, which is what I said. So last week, what I said to you all, if you've already done use your literature review from your project planning, don't bother to change it. You, especially you, Janina, you have a score of 94. Don't you just paste that directly in. The only thing you have to do is in the introduction, and not just you, everyone in your group who did project planning last semester and the semester before, you guys simply take your literature review, which is your assignment 3, and paste it into that. That's your whole background research. The only thing you need to do is in your introduction, I would have indicated to indicate the aim of your project, right? Remove that, because your aim is already, before this was a separate assignment, so you need to introduce back your project. But because this is now a chapter in your report, you don't need to put back the aim of your project. So you can leave this out and then start with discuss the purpose of your literature review and the topic. This background research is the same one you would have done for chapter 3. So even though the slides, my slides, you find that what she wants versus what maybe Maria wants are slightly different for the background research. My take on it is, you've already done your background research. Take that background research and paste it in. Don't change it. Copy your entire references, paste it into the reference section, etc. You've already done it. There's no need for you to redo it. Unless you didn't do well in it, then you would need to. Or like Crystal, she did e-commerce, and now she's switching now to learning management, right? So that's why. So those are the things that you should factor in. All right. So that's why. So, but all of you already did this, your literature review already. So you utilize that. And if you don't have this, if for any reason you don't have this, use the background research from your IPR if you wish. But this chapter, this background research, which is assignment 3 from your project planning module, is what I would recommend you take and put as your chapter for your background research. Okay. Any questions there? Because, sorry, I did see 1 or 2 students doing over their background research, and so I did ask, why are you doing over your background research? You got a really high score in your background research and your project planning, and that background research was, I think was what, 1,200 words or something like that. Reuse that whole background research. The only thing you need to do is change, don't include the aim of the project in it, just remove the aim, but everything else remains the same. Good? Is that clear to you guys though?
Got it.
All right. Cecil, when you,
Folks, yeah,
when
I
you
just
did,
want to apologize. You all hearing noise from me. I didn't realize my mic was on. I apologize.
it's all right, Shalan. I didn't hear any noise, so it's not a problem. I think I was making too much noise. But guys, are you all clear? Cecil, I want to, for your group, did you all have to do a literature review as a separate assignment in project planning?
Yeah, I think so. And I believe that I could quickly pull it up and check.
Yes, your group would have, because you would have had 3 assignments for project planning. The
Yeah,
only
we did have 3. Yeah.
Right, and your third assignment was the literature review, and that's what I'm saying. Take that whole literature review chapter and paste it in here, and that is your literature review. The only person here who I believe would have been Crystal, because she would have done it prior to the last 2 running of the class. And in the last 2 running was when Gani took over the module, and he introduced 3 assignments, the third one being literature review. But even back when the others were doing it, literature review was part of the project proposal, but it was included within it. So the word count wasn't a lot for it, more like the IPR, 400 words or so. But when you guys did it last semester and the semester before, you all had like 12 or 1800 words, I think was the value, right? So, but if you want, you can just reuse those same slides, because you all have the slides, right? So this was, let me see how much words this was. Apologies, right? So 5 and 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 1400 words or so. 1500, sorry, 1500 words. Good. So you have a completed background research. Go ahead and use it. No need to redo. Okay. So guys, any other question before we close off class?
Not from me.
No problem. Well, have a good night, everyone. I'll email all the slides. I'll upload the videos, etc. later today after it's converted, and I'll share them with you, right? And I'll also email you the new version of the background research as well for those who consider it, and I'll put it in the shared folder again. So I'll remove so you'll see a background research version 1, and then the version 2 will be the Gani. I'll put Gani next to it, his name next to background research chapter, so you know that Gani and Mina are basically working the same, they work with the same philosophy, etc. So you'll find that their methods are very similar. So we'll do it the way Gani wants for those who would have who may be interested. Okay, so no need for you to redo your background research. Thank you very much. Have a good night, and
Okay, good night, folks.
take care again.
Night, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.